Well, the Honourable Chris Carter.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not ashamed that the previous Labor government ran government surpluses because we used that money wisely to invest in the future of our country. Unlike the existing government, Mr. Speaker, we had a plan. We had the lowest unemployment in the OECD. That was part of our plan. It was by active engagement by the government that was achieved. Wasn't that an amazing achievement in today's world? We had the lowest unemployment in the OECD. We had lower unemployment within Australia. Today, after 15 months of the national government, we have a higher percentage of unemployed than Australia does. I'm not ashamed that we used that surplus to pay off our government debt. We had, by the time we left office, the lowest per capita government debt in the developed world. I'm not ashamed, Mr. Speaker, that we doubled education spending. And we put it into everything from an enormous boost of $1 billion into ECE developments over 9 years, interest-free student loans, I think something like 22 schools built in the last year when I was Education Minister. It was an astonishing investment in education, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. We doubled health spending. We focused it at the grassroots. About primary health care was a major focus of the doubling of that money, that surplus, which we were just criticised by the previous member for running up under the Labor government. That surplus which was used and invested for our country. I'm not ashamed that $1 billion extra dollars went into state housing. It went into income-related rents. Did I hear not in your electorate? That simply would not be true, Mr. Hayes. Everywhere, the state house stock, the largest asset that the government owns, was expanded, modernised, and most importantly of all, Mr. Speaker, we provided affordable rents to the poorest New Zealanders, which lifted up the quality of their lives, the quality of their children's lives, had direct impacts on their health as well as their lifestyles. Those were things that I'm very proud of, Mr. Speaker. No government would be ashamed of that sort of investment in the future of our country. The member kept making reference to Māori. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, it was under the Labor government that Māori TV was set up, let alone a whole host of other cultural and practically related things. Employment, education, health, income-related rents for state houses, 60% of whose tenants are Māori. That had a direct and positive impact on the lives of Māori people. You know, we heard a lot in the Prime Minister's statement about national standards. You know, what a joke. I believe, I was the Education Minister before the election, Mr. Speaker, and I think they came up with a slogan, national standards. They didn't know what it meant. They'd done no work on it at all. That's obvious, of course, because we're still going through the process of trying to discover what they are and how we implement them. They came up with a slogan. Sounded very attractive to parents, didn't it? Let's make sure that your 5-year-old, your 7-year-old, your 9-year-old has reached a literacy and numeracy standard. Of course, if they'd bothered to do a bit of investigation, they would have found, as the Education Ministry told them straight after the election, we actually already had those standards. They were called the Literacy Progressions and the Numeracy Project. They established a benchmark where each child was measured against it. Didn't establish league tables. League tables, of course, is what happened in the UK and the USA, where schools were set, their achievement was set one against the other, and which of all of the experts around so-called national standards will tell you is the wrong way to go in measuring success of students. But putting aside the whole debunked and ridiculous idea, because as I said, we already have a record in schools available to parents, and under the National Educational Guidelines, all schools have to report in simple language to parents. The other thing they talked a lot about, but actually is already required to do, and ERO checked on it. It's interesting. One of the things that National seems to love to do is liberate accountability. They've taken, one of the first steps they did in their new administration of education was reduce the amount of checking that went on at schools. So many primary schools now will have children going right through the school without any ERO review taking place. So parents actually will have now less ability to find out if their child is being well educated than they did prior to the election under the Labor government, where all schools were required to undergo an ERO review every 3 years so that the community, as well as the teachers, could know what sort of job they were doing. they could get advice about doing it better, and there were better educational outcomes. You know, it seems to me, Mr. Speaker, that slogans have been used to sabotage what is a world-class education system. You know, our education system is not failing, it's succeeding. By any measure, any international comparison, New Zealand students do the highest, the best scores overall in literacy, numeracy and science in the whole English-speaking world. And there's only a couple of countries, Finland, Singapore, that beat us in numeracy and literacy. We came best in the world on science, Mr. Speaker, and the whole of the world under the OECD scores. New Zealand students at 15 did the best in the world at science. And you know what this government has done? It didn't want to put any more resources into education, so it cut science, music and maths advisors, art advisors out. They got chucked out, they all got sacked, and so they employed a few more literacy and numeracy advisors. So our students, best in the world in science at 15, now our schools don't have science advisors because somehow national standards, which we still haven't worked out what they are, 15 months after the election, we still don't know what national standards are. We don't know how they're going to be implemented. Schools and principals have asked if we could have a trial, so we could have an evidence-based process to see if it would work. You know, everything else you do, you have an evidence-based process where you have experts working out a program, you test it to see if it's working, you leave it in the hands of specialists. But is that good enough for this current National Act government? Oh no, Mr. Speaker, it's not, because they came up in the election campaign with a slogan. They didn't know what it meant. All they wanted to do was push some buttons. I think they call it, Mr. Speaker, dog whistle politics, where you say your child will have a national standard which you will be able to measure your kid against, and the school will have to tell you all about it if you vote for us. Of course, as I said, Mr. Speaker, we had an education system that is among the best in the world, People come from all over the world to look at the work we do in literacy and numeracy in this country, as well as in science and the creative arts. I constantly dealt with delegations from overseas of educational experts coming to New Zealand. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, when I was at the Education Ministers' Conference 2 years ago in London, the Education Secretary, the top civil servant in Finland, the country that came top in literacy and numeracy in the OECD scores, came out to me and she said, "You're doing great things in New Zealand, I want to come and have a look." I said, "Well, how's things going in Finland?" She said, "Actually not so well. We've just elected a new Conservative government and they are starting to erode our processes." Isn't that interesting, Mr. Speaker? The chief bureaucrat, not a politician, the top expert in education in Finland, told me 2 years ago in London, I'm really worried about where our new Conservative government is going in education. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid we'd have to repeat that advice to them now, because our standards too are going to be eroded by this divisive process of so-called national standards. You know, I heard the Prime Minister speak the other day. You know, we needed for students at the other end of the school, those who are leaving school without sufficient achievement, we need to get them into apprenticeships and trades training and alternative paths for education. And this amazing flash of deja vu came to me, Mr. Speaker, and I thought of Schools Plus, this program that we had come up with in our last year in government, where we developed with the education sector, with business, with trade unions, with industry, where students staying at school would explore different paths of learning, that every high school in New Zealand would expand on their Gateway program, which is their taster program for work, that students would have this opportunity to be based at a school, supervised, but maybe out working 3 or 4 days, and the very ablest students already going into tertiary education, but being supervised at the school. Schools Plus, a comprehensive plan that was designed to deal with the tail end of underachievement, which every developed country has, and which we have a smaller one than most others, but we came up with the plan. And what happened to the plan? It was ditched in the first month. We had silly old Anne Tolley, who's a total embarrassment a total embarrassment to the government. She's recently been demoted, lost tertiary education, thank goodness. Can't wait till she loses the rest, because then education might have a chance. She ditched Schools Plus straight away. The other thing that she ditched right at the beginning of the process was we'd done an audit to find out sites for new ECEs in Auckland because land is so expensive. 27 schools put their hands up and said, we'd like to have